Hello YouTube, and I'm going to show you today how to carry in battleships. More specifically, this battleship, the Tier 6 Japanese Fuso, armed with 12 14-inch guns and a heavy 6-inch battery as a secondary armament. The Fuso has excellent AA and very good range, but it's slow, doesn't turn very well, and you can see it from miles and miles away. Carrying in a battleship is pretty substantially different to carrying in a cruiser. A cruiser or destroyer can use their maneuverability and detection range to contest and take points, as well as the fact that they're very quick so they can flex. Battleships can't do that, so you have to think quite far ahead in order to predict where the enemy will be and where to defeat them. In this match, for instance, I'm thinking the enemy is going to be going up the east side, so I start moving that way very early on. I do this because I realize that they have quite a few cruisers. They have several Clevelands and a Pensacola as well as an Omaha. That's a lot of speed. They're likely to be pushing up the flanks and then pushing into our cap circle, and it's my job to blunt that advance while our other side grinds down their battleships and slowly pushes through there. Let's pause here briefly and take a look at the way that our team is deployed. Two of our battleships are heading west, the Nagato and the Congo, and the Warspite is following behind. This is the place where battleships normally go on this map because it affords them lots of sea room to play in. However, I know for a fact that these guys are very, very heavy on their cruisers. So I decide that I'm going to head east and try and deal with the cruisers. You can see me opening fire on the first cruiser that I spot here. I'm just going to fire raking shots up and down their line for the time being. I'm not actually planning to stick around and engage, these are just opportunistic shots to get some early damage. And that was some quite good early damage actually, 4,000 damage on that Omaha. And I'm going to hit him again as soon as my guns come up. Now, doing this kind of damage early is very valuable, because it allows you to take guns out of the game and torpedoes out of the game that could come back to bite you later on. Cruisers are particularly good to attack at this time, especially if they're being careless, because you can deal so much damage to them using your guns. And the Fuso's got so many guns that RNG is probably going to give you at least one big damage hit. So for instance here I don't aim it perfectly and I still get an 11k Citadel hit. I'm going to continue firing up and down their line here. I can see a Nagato off in the distance. I don't reasonably expect to hit him at this range, but I'm going to take a pot shot because early damage is worthwhile, and you never know, I might knock one of his guns out, which is less dangerous later in the game. Now at this point you'll also note that I'm able to turn around if I need to engage the enemy should it look like the west side is going to be facing overwhelming force. But from about this moment onwards, and you can see the client desynchronization biting me there, from this moment onwards I can start to see where the enemy cruisers are deploying. The enemy Cleveland is in the east, and I'll soon see another one of his like turn up there too. There's mainly battleships in the west, and battleship engagements in open water are very slow normally. Battleships take a while to kill each other because their armor is so good, and because it's so inaccurate at very long ranges. This means that generally battleship engagements, particularly until about the 10-minute mark, probably aren't going to be deciding the game. The main reason you tend to lose early in World of Warships is because the fast stuff survives, gets into your cap circle, a destroyer lays smoke, and then that's that. You can't reset the cap. Especially if all your fast ships with high refire rate and the ability to get in there and kill the destroyer have died as well. So your job, generally speaking as a battleship, if you want to win the game early, is to support your light ships and to destroy the enemy's light ships. Fighting battleships early on in the game, unless you're doing what I'm doing here, which is just taking easy pot shots at ships at long range before engaging where it's worthwhile doing so, these are the kind of engagements that lose games. I see battleship drivers sitting at 20-30 kilometers from the enemy and they fail to do any damage. Whereas what I'm doing here is I'm trying to take out the enemy ships that are actually dangerous to our prospects of winning the game, which are the cruisers and the destroyers. You can see here that wasn't a particularly impressive shot on that Cleveland. He put his brakes on and managed to dodge the start very ably, however that renders him fairly vulnerable to follow-up shots. Stopping briefly, if we have a take a look at the way that the game is developing again. Our battleships have started to engage their battleship line. There's a destroyer that's pushed up towards us, and a couple of their cruisers are on the west side, but a lot of their very powerful and fast cruisers are over this side. I can see 3 cruisers, the carrier is almost certainly here, and we probably aren't going to lose in the west, because you can see there that all our ships are still at full health, everybody's just sort of chipped away at each other. That's going to take a while to resolve itself, probably about 4 to 5 minutes at the very least. That gives me lots of time, now that I'm near the cap circle, to pound on the cruisers. And if I pound on the cruisers, I can swing back to help our battleships out or delay the enemy capping, while our fast ships take the cap. I'm using this island to give me some cover from the cruisers and the destroyers, because if their destroyer has launched a spread of long-range torpedoes through here, then they'll hit the island before they hit me. This also allows me to continue firing on that Cleveland. I open up here, and I believe that I managed to get a blind hit on him. Yep, managed to get 2 blind hits on him, in fact, because he stays still for too long. If you're in a cruiser, don't stay still like that, you're just gonna get hit. I see some torpedo bombers coming in and I focus fire them, however they go after a different target than me. So I continue on. I'm going to start moving around the north side of this island to engage the Pensacola, which is on the other side of it. In the meantime though, I can probably land a hit on this Cleveland as he goes down the headland. There he goes. So I fire out the headland. Now remember, your shots in World of Warships are like artillery. They fly over obstacles, and your camera will generally show you the highest point on your shell arm. So I was able to fire straight over that headland there. You'll see me do that 2 or 3 times during the course of this engagement. Now whenever I'm engaging in a battleship, I always make sure I turn my guns where I expect the enemy to be. Getting caught out in the open and having your guns pointed the other way is a death sentence. You will get salvo after salvo from cruisers and you will not be able to respond. So point your guns in the direction you're going to turn and hit your right mouse button or press Ctrl X. This locks your turret aim point to the cursor and allows your turrets to traverse while you look around. I put my scout up about here just so that I can see the destroyer if he happens to blunder into the scout range, and then I spot the Pensacola. Now watch closely here. I fire behind the island, almost straight at it. And the reason I do this is because the shells will continue on past the island and hit the Pensacola. Well, they would have done if I'd named it properly. Not a lot of people do that, and it's a waste. You waste your shells when you do that. Now, I'm going to employ a tactic from World of Tanks here that works equally well in World of Warships, which is armor angling. The more you increase your armor angle, the thicker effective armor you have to the enemy. So, in this case, I'm trying to present at least a 20 or 30 degree angle to greater or lesser degrees of success. And that means that he is not able to penetrate my superstructure or my citadel armor. And it means that he's going to score a lot fewer penetrating hits, whereas whenever I hit him, I'm almost guaranteed to penetrate. Like, a lot of battleship drivers don't do this, which means they get citadel pen very easily. Now, the Fuso has quite an old armor scheme, which means you can sometimes get away with not armor angling, but for ships such as the Nagato and the Yamagi, it's a must, so get into the habit early. You can see here that the Pensacola is going to come up from behind this rock. I don't really trust my ability to hit him before he comes out, so I wait for him to mask himself. And then I fire a big salvo and get 2 citadel hits. So he's now down to 77 health. You'll see that pop up in just a second in the alt key. And I was furious at that. I was really, really annoyed. But he's not a threat anymore. If you were not down to 77 health, you'd go and hide as fast as possible. So I'm just going to ignore him. What's more important is this destroyer here. And once again, I fire straight at the island, where I expect him to be. And the rounds go straight over the top of it. This DD is about to meet a very sticky end. Single salvo for these 14-inch guns. Destroyers should generally be a priority target because of their torpedoes, but that was an American destroyer, and I knew I could leave him till after I destroyed the Pensacola because he was unlikely to be able to get into torpedo range before then. Now let's stop the action again and take a look at what the situation is. Over here we can see their 2 battleships are still slugging it out with our fleet over here. We're 4 minutes further in and this fight has not resolved itself. We've got a warspite who's cruising in towards the cap circle, and we have a cruiser who is in the cap circle as well. However, he's being intercepted by a battleship and by the 2 cruisers that have turned around. So I need to turn around and try and support him. So I'm going to make this big move down here towards the south end of the island. This allows me to engage the 2 cruisers that are currently floating down there, and allows me to give some backup to this guy in the cap circle. And if I need to, I can always head west after I've engaged these 2 cruisers. and head back towards the cap circle to defend if I absolutely have to, which is actually what ends up happening. Let's speed through this. So I don't particularly want to see a battleship take 2 minutes to turn itself around. You can see how the fight's developing on the other flank while we're here. The battleships continue to plink at each other for very little effect, but a destroyer has appeared and has launched torpedoes at our Congo. Now the Congo doesn't handle this very well. He manages to get hit by these torpedoes, presumably because they were launched outside of its range of detection, and he doesn't react very quickly. He loses an awful lot of his health here, and goes down to 8k, and it's finished off from a salvo from the battleships. So we're down a battleship on that side, which indicates to me that I'm probably going to need to cut back into the cap circle after I've engaged these cruisers to the south here. But there's no threat to the cap from that west side right now. I can afford to take my time. The Cleveland's about to unmask himself from behind this headland, so I set up to take a shot at him when he appears. He's actually under fire from our warspite, who is being torpedo bombed by the carrier. And he's distracted by him while I take the first shot. I aim this a bit short. I think he's actually tacking in when he's not, he's tacking out. So I misaim it kind of badly. I think he's going faster than he is. The warspite has beached himself on the island here, so I'm pretty sure he's going to die. He's got 2 Clevelands firing at him and he's about to get torp bombed again, so yeah, he's probably screwed. So it's up to me to try and finish these cruisers off. Slightly misaimed again, but 4,300 damage is always nice. And as I'm reloading, the warspite will finish him off. But what's more interesting to me right now is I can see the enemy aircraft is starting to take an interest in me. For reasons unknown to me, the enemy aircraft carrier has sat behind this island in plain view, so I'm going to take the opportunity to deal some damage to him. He has, however, launched torpedo bombers, which are perfectly coming my way. So I turn starboard to try and give myself the best possible chance to evade them, which is actually a kind of poor move looking back on it. I probably would have been better off heading further down the sea lane, so I would have had a little bit more space. I focus my anti-aircraft guns fire on the dive bombers by using control left click, and that allows me to destroy 2 of them before they drop, meaning that all the bombers miss me and I don't have to worry about repairing fire. Now the torpedo bombers are starting to head towards me, and I can see that they're going to pass over that island, so I'm going to turn hard into the island in order to dodge them. Now, if there's a single group of torpedo bombers, that would have been great, but I didn't know there was the second group carrying them behind me. I take 3 hits and instinctively repair it, and then I notice the other set of torpedo bombers as I'm about to crash into the island. Yeah, great move on board. All is not completely lost, however, as I'm screened from the torpedo bomber's current position by that island, so they have to fly around me. This is where the Fuso's AA does a supreme job of dealing with. I control left click to focus and start shooting them down one by one, as he passes straight over the top of my AA. If he'd been a little brighter, he would have swung them around a little bit further, but he doesn't. He wants to try and get that perfect manual drop. And then as he drops, he loses 2 more aircraft to the Fuso's AA guns, meaning only 1 torpedo gets dropped, and it doesn't harm. After taking a couple of opportunistic pot shots at the carrier, I take stock of the situation. We have a battleship closing on our cap, but it's not the most important thing right now. What's important is that the enemy cruiser has been spotted to the south of that island, and is heading round the island into our cap circle. Now a cruiser is difficult to spot, which means that if I don't kill him now, and I head south to engage the aircraft carrier, he's going to get into the cap circle, and none of our ships are going to be close enough to see him. So he's going to take the cap circle, and we're going to lose the game. Even if the aircraft carrier sends planes after him, the Cleveland's AA is strong enough that, well, it's extremely unlikely that we're going to be able to actually take him out with aircraft. So it's up to me to go and sink him before he does that. A lot of battleship drivers assume it isn't up to them to reset the cap, that it's the cruiser's job. But so often the battleships assume too much, and we get capped out because the cruisers didn't go back to reset. Generally speaking, in solo pubs, if you can reset the cap, go back and do it. I set up a good ambush for the Cleveland, and I'm able to hit it for 17,000 damage and knock one of his turrets out, which makes the fight a lot easier. A Cleveland versus a Fuso in close quarters can often come down to who can put the most DPM out the most quickly. The Fuso's secondary batteries are extremely effective, but because of that long reload, slow turret traverse, and slow ability to turn, it means that the Cleveland can sometimes get round you into arcs where your guns can't go, because those two centerline mounted guns can't point forward or aft. So what I'm doing here is I'm maneuvering to make sure that I can always get my guns pointed. I don't know what happened there, I botched the shot a little bit, and I probably shouldn't have done, so I take more damage than I need to. You'll notice I burned my repair ability there just before I started engaging him to get a little bit more of an HP buffer between me and him. And that repaired some of the damage I took from flooding earlier on. He's now firing away at me with high explosive, but this is a foregone conclusion. He's not using AP, and he's not sending fire because my damage control module I have fitted. I decide to ripple fire just to make sure that I do get him, because I think I salved like the last one did. And I'm able to put in a Citadel hit, and a lot of secondary battery hits to finish him off. He finally switched to AP and did me a lot of damage, but it was too little too late. It's about at this point I realise just how much trouble we're in, because I take a look at the counter and oh, 3 minutes left, this isn't good. The enemy are now in a position where they can draw this out, and given how much work I've done, I'd rather like the 1.5 times bonus to this. So I immediately start turning south. Our carrier players already think it's a draw, and from the look of the enemy's health, which is currently sitting at around 30,000 and 16,000, I figure that that's probably what's going to happen. There's a very specific set of events that have to happen in order for us to win. The carrier has to knock out one or other of those ships, and I have to knock out the other. I ask in chat if the aircraft carrier will send a torpedo bomber squadron each after the Saipan and the Nagato. And the reason for that is they've got just enough HP that they'll probably get sunk by a full squadron of Ranger torpedoes. Unfortunately, and I can't really blame him for this, he sends them after one ship, and since it's likely to be a draw, he probably wants to do as much damage and get a kill. I can't blame him for that. This game looks like a draw. But he does something that's potentially game-winning. He allocates his dive bombers to that flat top. You can see them in the left-hand side of the screen there. I don't notice this at the time until later on. But he's going to set that aircraft carrier on fire, and when he does that, the game is pretty much over. Now at this point a couple of things have to happen. The flat top needs to sink, and I need to be able to kill the Nagato. I can't kill him in the number of salvos I have left, unless I get some very lucky Citadel hits, because I only have time for 2 salvos. However, 1 or 2 of the torpedoes strike home and reduces HP down to the point where I can kill him. So I start opening up on him. I badly misaim the shot, but RNG is on my side, and I'm able to get a waterline hit in his fore end, doing just under 4k of damage, and putting him into the zone where I can destroy him with my main guns. The aircraft carrier, at this point, starts sending torpedo bombers towards me. A little bit too late, but I don't particularly want to get alphaed out by them, so I begin to adjust my speed to avoid them, while setting up for another attack on the Nagato. I send another salvo his way and start to evade. I don't use my repair kit, but I do burn my repair ability, just to try and soak some of that torpedo damage and to soak any return fire from the Nagato. And at this point, the Cleveland turns up and is a hero. He burns that Nagato's health out just enough. You can see me getting hit by the dive bombers and the torpedoes here, but he burns the Nagato's health down just enough that I'm able to finish him off with a good Citadel hit. I briefly contemplate hitting the aircraft carrier, but I realise he's on fire, and if I fire on him, then the Nagato lives, and we draw. So I set up on the Nagato, pull the trigger, and pray that these actually manage to do something. In the meantime, I get torpedoed by another set of torpedoes, but the shells are on the way, and there we go. I managed to kill him. This was one of the biggest games I'd ever had in terms of experience, at 2,800 experience base. Now, I was extremely lucky in managing to land that hit at the very, very end of the game that secured it for us, and our aircraft carrier in Cleveland did a sterling job as well. But there were points in that game where I made a decisive contribution towards the win, and by playing to my battleship's strengths, I made the win significantly more possible. Probably the key moment there was where I was able to destroy the cruisers and the destroyer that were heading towards the north. If they had pushed through, and if they had gotten to the aircraft carrier, they probably would have sunk the aircraft carrier, and you saw how crucial the aircraft carrier was at the end of the game. and then they would have pushed onto the cap circle where the destroyer would have laid down a smoke cloud, and that probably would have been that. We would have lost. You'll note that at no point during that game, aside from the very beginning of the game where I threw a few snapshots their way, did I get into a stand-up fight with another battleship. Because that kind of fight takes so long to complete that I wouldn't have been able to influence the game anywhere else apart from that one small part of the map. I was able to finish the fights that I was engaged in so quickly that I could move on to the next fight and therefore have a disproportionate impact on the game. Now, I'm not taking anything away from our battleships who chose to get into that kind of engagement. Those battleships held the enemy up on the west flank and allowed me to do my job of crushing their eastern flank. However, generally you can rely on the PUBG players to do that. Your other players will go and fight other battleships because that's what they expect battleships to do. You have to try and break out of that method of thinking and go and crush the cruisers. Pick the fights you can win and win them decisively, because that's how you buy your team time and space in order to do their other jobs. Because our cruisers could go and do their job, and our aircraft carrier had space to breathe, and our destroyers could do their job because their cruisers were dead and weren't pressuring the cap, or pressuring our aircraft carrier. The take-home message here, I hope, is that you should react to threats, maintain your situational awareness, know where your battleship can do the most good. If that means that you have to go somewhere you wouldn't normally go, or leave other ships to fight in the main line, then do it. Next, you should pick important fights that you can win quickly and decisively, like that cruiser engagement. Win the fights quickly, crush the flank, and then move on. Finally, plan where you're going to be in 2 minutes' time after you've won this decisive engagement. Plan where you're going to be in 5 minutes' time, in 10 minutes' time. Change that plan as you go, but make sure you have a rough idea of where you're going to be so you're not blundering aimlessly around the map. You need to know where your next decisive engagement is going to be and how you're going to win it. So make sure you're ready to fight that engagement and the one after that. Hopefully this has helped you with your battleship play. Good luck out on the ocean. I'm on board G1. See you at sea.